gamer burnout. That's something that I've experienced multiple times as I've journeyed through my life. And I find that for me personally, just to kind of explain what gamer burnout is from my point of view, it's just I play these games and a few different things may happen. One, I play the game and I'm not really there. I'm just pressing buttons and watching the screen flash, but I'm not really getting anything out of it. I'm not learning anything. I'm just trying to either beat the storyline or just pass time. Or I have a game that I just bought maybe a week ago and I played it maybe twice, and there's just the thought of playing it feels like a chore to me. Like just the thought of looking at my Steam list of games and like, oh man, I got to beat that game. Oh man, I got to beat this game. And I'm like, I don't want to play this game. You know, I just don't. Things like that have been happening lately to where I want to game, but I don't want to play that game. You know, and there's tons of games out there for me to play that are considerably good, but I just don't have any desire to play those games for whatever reason. And I don't want to chalk that up to old age per se. I have a few different ideas. I'd like to hear your opinion, Ian, before I really dig into a few different topics that I'm going to talk about.
I have an overwhelming theory. I call it peak care or peak fucks to give about how you feel about a franchise. And so for me, like one of the moments when I was younger that really, because I used to like, there was a point in my life when I aggressively bought every new AAA title that came out, regardless of what genre it was. I just bought it because I had to be in that collective experience, that collective culture of everyone playing. Dragon Age broke it for me because I remember, because I loved the hell out of Knights of the Old Republic, and just that game and that franchise was fantastic because it was something familiar, but it was also new. So you couldn't predict where the story was going. And I started playing Dragon Age, and I reached a point while playing Dragon Age where I realized this is the same exact mechanic they used in Knights of the Old Republic. And so I sat there and I'm like, I don't care about these characters. I don't care about the story. I don't care to learn these characters. And the same thing happened with that other BioWare title that came out that's gigantic and massive. Mass Effect.
That massive game that has effects on people.
Massive game, it's got shit. You do stuff and it impacts other stuff. And I found myself just not caring because I just couldn't extend my feelings out to incorporate this story because it just ultimately, it wasn't what I wanted and it just didn't feel like it was good enough for what I wanted. And then I encountered the same thing with Call of Duty where like I bought every Call of Duty religiously, and then it reached a point where I'm like, nothing really changed from the last one except they put in jump packs. And so, and just at that point, I'm just like, and the storyline's only going to be 5 hours long. It's not going to be as epic and mesmerizing as the first game was. Like that first moment when you rush across a field and then you storm and take Pavlov's house in Stalingrad, and you just never have that same epic, grandiose moment again because everything is kind of trying to emulate that first moment. And so I just got perpetually burned down on Call of Duty titles just because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of had the same situation with Dragon Age, and I think for me, I have this hard time. Like I have what I would call gamer denial, where I don't want to admit that I don't like this game, because admitting that I don't like this game means that I inherently made a mistake with my money. And for me, money is a sensitive topic. So I would do everything I could to, and I actually don't regret this. I would try to remain very unbiased. And that's why I worked at GameStop. And so that also affected my gamer burnout. And I'll get to that in a second. But I love the fact that I could find the good points in a game, but at the same time list all the bad points in the game, but at the same time detach the blame of me buying this game and not liking it. Like it's really weird because I love selling games to people because they would come to me and they would ask me, why do I buy this game? Why should I buy this game? Or, what's a good game for me? And I would ask them what kind of games you like. And here's why you might like this game. Here's why you might not like that game. And really tell them all the reasons. But at the same time, I would convince myself for any game that I purchased that it was a good game. And I think for me, the game that really disillusioned me was a game called Brink.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, this game was published by Bethesda, developed by id Software, I believe. I could be wrong on the developer, but I remember hyping up this game so much and getting so many pre-orders for this game, and like being so excited for it because it was parkour and shooting and teamwork, and it really emphasized the whole, you know, team game. Because I love anything co-op. I love parkour, and I like shooters if I'm playing with my friends. And I get this game, and I tried so hard to like this game. I tried so hard to enjoy playing this game, even though it had so many game-breaking issues and bugs, and the online was terrible. Like, I just tried so hard to convince myself that I liked this game, and I think for that moment for me was like, I need to stop wasting my money on games. I need to stop buying every game that comes out that they're sensationalizing, because it's not good. You know, this game looks good, but it wasn't good, and I could clearly see that if I looked at the warning signs. And I think the fact that I have a degree in animation and game design really, on one side, it makes me respect the hard work that people put into games, because I know even if a game is crappy, there's still a lot of hard work and blood, sweat, and tears that go into it. Maybe not a lot of thought, but to make the game, there's a lot that goes on, all the channels you have to go through. But at the same time, I feel very critical of games, and I feel like these games should have a higher quality. And I think at some point that switch kind of flipped for me, where I was just like, no, I need to be a little bit more critical for myself. Like, yes, you know, still be unbiased for customers and for other people who are curious about the game, but for myself, I need to be a lot more selective. And after that, I stopped buying a lot of games. Like, I'll buy games on sale, but very rarely do I spend more than like $20, and usually more than $10 on a game, unless I'm really excited about it or like I can make a video off of it.
Actually, I think I can, like Dragon Age was one of the ones that started it for me. But I think the one before that really just put the nail in the coffin for me is like the buying every title was Kane and Lynch. Did you ever play that one?
Yeah, Kane and Lynch.
Yeah,
Kane and Lynch 2 for me did that for me. Yeah, I didn't like.
Oh
Kane
my
and Lynch
god,
2.
Kane and Lynch 2 was a train wreck of a title. Like,
yeah.
Like, as far as like Kane and Lynch 1, I could at least bear to play through it because I liked the company that made it, and I'm like, I'm gonna tolerate this because I respect you guys as game makers. But then they were just repeatedly slapping me in the face for like 45 minutes while I was playing this game. And I'm just like, why do you hate me so much? Why do you hate me in this game? And so it moved forward. And then I picked up, like, I'm like, you know what? Because I traded in 3 games I liked to get Kane and Lynch for my 360. And I just regretted it. Like, it was like the biggest mistake of my life in the sense of like, I could have kept those 3 games and just bought Kane and Lynch like a year later for $1 because it's such a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And so like Kane and Lynch 2, I waited till it was like $3 on a Steam sale, and I still kind of want my money back. Like that game, initially when Kane and Lynch came out, you couldn't turn off the shaky cam.
You can turn. Yeah, I hated that.
That was stuck on. So it was like I'd never actually gotten motion sickness from a game before until I played that game and I sprinted somewhere, and I'm like, oh my god, who thought this was a good idea? I'm like, I get you're trying to be all like noirish and realist, like with a guy following with a camcorder. That's kind of the theme you're going for. But you should have thought about the fact, like, if you take and shake a camera while you're doing something, it really just overall ruins the entire experience.
Especially when you're supposed to be controlling the person on the other side of that camera.
Oh yeah, and not to mention, it's one of those games where they didn't think about like shooters are fun because things happen, like the bullets go where you want them because you're aiming them. But in Kane and Lynch, the aiming reticle was literally just a gigantic suggestion box where the rounds could go wherever they wanted. And what I thought was kind of funny about like Brink, for example, like I wanted to like Brink, like I really wanted to like Brink. I went to PAX when like Bethesda was launching it, and I got 2 free T-shirts. Like one's like a Molotov cocktail that says like crowd control. Then they have another one that says like crowd control, and it's a gigantic assault rifle. So I'm like, oh sweet, this game's gonna be great, and like I thought it was gonna be awesome. And then my buddy bought it before I did, and I sat and watched him play it. And then there was no single player. It was like multiplayer only that had like basic story components in it. Where I'm like, this isn't a game. This is worse than Quake 3 Arena, as far as like
it had the stupidest AI bots I had ever seen in a game.
Yeah, and it was just one of those things where I'm like, no, I'm not going to spend money on this, even though my friends were playing it. And I'm like, you guys are going to be done with this in a week, because ultimately, yeah, it's a neat, fun idea to have parkour and a gun shooter, but ultimately, it's just weak because they're focusing more on mechanics and graphics, like one of my buddies would say, like mechanics and graphics over overall storytelling. Which, I mean, back in the day, John Romero and John Carmack had this feeling that video games were like a porno. A story is there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be there. So it's not required. That was kind of their feelings on how games were made, especially first-person shooters. So you still have a lot of those like online arena type games where the story is secondary to the overall mechanics. But now that you have the ability to tell a captivating and compelling story with graphics, with game mechanics, with gameplay, it's just laziness when you release nothing but a multiplayer title.
Yeah, I have to agree. Unless your multiplayer is very strong in some way.
Oh yeah, unless it's like, I mean, like there are some games like Quake, for example, or Doom that their foundations were, or Unreal Tournament, their foundations were built on multiplayer. But that also has to do with the fact that their multiplayer component existed when multiplayer was the new thing. It was very much a new, exciting frontier that no one had tapped. So it makes sense why games like that could exist on those playing fields. But for a newer genre that has no established player base, aside from Bethesda published it, you're going to have a really hard time finding dedicated players who are going to stick to it unless your game is absolutely enthralling and captivating and amazing.
Yeah, and I feel like we've touched on another topic that I would like to talk about more in the future, which is like multiplayer games or developers making like AAA games that are marketed towards a specific like, how do I put this? Like Street Fighter V is marketing themselves towards competitive gamers instead of just making a game that's really good. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing because I enjoy that game, but I also want to call out somebody when they're doing something, or Call of Duty is another good game. They started off as a single player like World War II simulator type, not a simulator, but like a World War II arcade game.
Yeah, World War II. What was really captivating and amazing about Call of Duty was that the first game when it came out, it didn't limit you to one perspective. You had American soldier, a Russian soldier, and then a British soldier, I think. And so your perspective was all over the war. So you had this great narrative structure where you could jump between different characters. And ultimately, it didn't matter. But Call of Duty now kind of, I think, focuses more on, it still does that jump around, but it doesn't do it nearly as all-encompassing. But I haven't played some of the newer titles. But that was what was so trippy about Call of Duty originally, was because you were experiencing these different situations. And Call of Duty overall, I used to play competitive multiplayer for that. Like, I actually used to go to a LAN center, and we would compete with other teams for cash prizes and computers and shit. So I used to play that, like, for that, because the multiplayer in that game was so solid. But that was also built on the fact that Call of Duty had a good enough single-player game to bring in countless gamers to want to play it.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what I'll label that as, but just basically games kind of losing their direction, I want to say, because you go from a single-player game to a game that's primarily multiplayer because it's more attractive or more sustainable, I'll say, because you play a single-player game, you beat it, and then you're done. There's not a lot of replayability to a lot of these games nowadays. Whereas a multiplayer game, every match is a new scenario. Yeah, you have the same maps and the same weapons and so on, but but we'll get onto that more one day, hopefully.
Oh yeah, but I have another great example of burnout. Like Halo. Like, did you ever play ODST?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, so a buddy of mine, I bought it and he bought it, and we expected to play, like, I don't know, we were hoping for like a weekend of playtime, like to have fun with it, And we ended up playing it, and the game lasted 4 hours. So it was like $60 for an expansion pack. And even the multiplayer in that game was literally just a boxed up copy of Halo 3. So it wasn't like you got to enjoy anything about that game. So that's one of those examples where literally they just shat out a product and just it carried itself on the fucking Halo name. And that was another example of like when I kind of stopped buying 360 games as often as I did, just because that one burned me so bad. Like, when the premier franchise of a gaming console, like they're the one that pushes the actual sale of units, is so basically just an expansion pack slap in the face, it really just starts to burn you out on what you're picking up.
Yeah, there's a lot of games that do that, or a lot of developers that do that, I feel, where they're just making games based off the name. And sometimes the line's really blurry. Like for me, Mario. you know, the games are fun, and at the same time, I feel like where can they go with this game besides really repeating the same thing or using a gimmick of the peripheral that comes with that console, you know? Or I'm trying to think of some other examples, but sometimes at the same time that works out for their favor. Like look at Hearthstone or Hearthstone.
Well, I mean, the thing that the advantage Mario has is that you're not really expecting anything different from Mario. Because I mean, like you'll expect something new and captivating. I mean, if there's anything Mario's done right, it's that Mario has jumped console generations very effectively and changed the manner in which you play it to make it more captivating and at least utilize the new features that are available. So like Super Mario Sunshine used the features and graphic capability of the GameCube pretty effectively. Super Mario Galaxy used kind of the control scheme of that system pretty well for gameplay. So I mean, I don't think Mario is one of those titles that's guilty of pushing out things that people don't want. I just think Halo, unfortunately, fell very much into that niche.
Oh yeah, and even more so now since they're not even owned by the original developer, and that gets into a whole like almost ethical issue when it comes to development of games. At least for me, because the people who created that game aren't there anymore, so you don't have the same spirit. Essentially, you know, I'm not a religious person per se, but the same essence that was there when it was created is not there anymore. The people who made that game didn't want to make it anymore. So this game is these new games that are coming out. You know, Halo 5. I think there's like 5 now, right? I stopped playing. I know Halo 4.
Yeah, because Halo 4 came out. I think Halo 5 is
on Xbox One.
Or did it already come out?
No, it's already out. It's already out. Yeah, Xbox One.
I lost track because I reached burnout at OEST, and I'm like, no, Halo, you're not getting any more of my money.
Exactly.
But I found Reach for like $2 at a thrift store, and I found Halo 4 for like $2 at a thrift store. That's all they're getting out of me was.
They're not bad games either. It's just they don't feel like full games, and I think we might have talked about this in the past, and I could go down another tangent, but I want to make some of these points real quick. But a lot of people, you know, I want to get this one out of the way because this is kind of a misconception that, you know, as you get older, you outgrow games. You know, I've heard that throughout my life when you get older, you're going to outgrow these games. And I don't think that's it because, you know, I've based a whole YouTube channel around video games. I love video games. You know, I coach gamers. And so that's not the issue. You know, it's not outgrowing them. That's a piece of art. That's like saying, oh yeah, I've outgrown Da Vinci because I'm 30 or 40 years old now. I don't like, you know, Leonardo da Vinci or I don't like Mozart, classical music. You could argue that that's not the same thing, but to me, gaming is a form of expression in many different ways.
Well, I think that what you have when people say you're going to outgrow games, it's a generational misconception. Because what you have now is you have the video game industry is making more money than the movie industry now. Like as far as X amount of money that they're pulling out of the public surpasses what Hollywood can do. And Hollywood has the advantage of, like, I mean, considering the first films were being released in the 1910s, early 1900s. Actually, no, shit, freaking Edison was making movies. Never mind. So like century before last, you had films coming out. So they have the advantage of that they were around for 70 years or more before video games. So they had that established culture to them. And I'm assuming people probably said something along the lines of, oh, you'll outgrow those moving pictures at some point. But what video games have is that now that they've been around since the early 70s, they have a quarter century or more of legitimacy to them now. So they're becoming more and more of the popular culture of the world.
Yeah.
And for someone to say you're going to outgrow something that is essentially one of the biggest money-making entertainment industries, it's a generational naivety because they lived in a time before video games existed. And ultimately, they're never going to stop existing at this point unless the sky falls.
Yeah. And look, they're making new jobs every day. If you look at it, you have YouTubers, different kinds of YouTubers, streamers, commentators, professional game players. You know, you have more and more developers. You have indie developers. You have marketers. You have, like, within developers, that's a whole subtopic to just go down. But you have so many unorthodox jobs that have been created because of video games and consultants. And I can go on for days. But the point is that not only is this just like a pastime, this has created its own financial ecosystem that's growing every day. So yeah, outgrowing it, that's a misconception. That's something that I don't think applies to me. The next few ones I think do apply directly to me. One of the big ones we've touched on this a little bit is oversaturation, and that we could go down forever. But yeah, I think working at GameStop, I checked out a lot of games and I played a lot of games without having to buy them. And so I think for me, I became very jaded with the amount of games that I played, and at the same time, not inherent to me, I created this expectation of what good games were because I liked certain things. I played so many of them that I didn't really. And this gets into another topic, which is valuing the game. I didn't really value that time. I wasn't paying for it. I didn't invest anything into it except for my job. I was doing it for my job. I was playing this game so that I could give better reviews. But at the same time, I think, every time I was playing it, I wasn't saying, oh, I'm so happy to have this game. I wasn't appreciating it, which is something very easy to not do, is appreciate the small things. But yeah, the oversaturation of games. One, there's a lot of games out there, and a lot of games are being titled AAA games, but that doesn't mean anything anymore because Call of Duty is a AAA game, but at the same time, it just feels hollow. It's a replication. It's almost like a Madden game now. And not to bash the game because it looks good. I don't like to say a game is bad. It's just something for me personally. I think it's because I'm a developer and I'm just very kind and I know work goes into this stuff. I'm bashing maybe the director who created this game or the big company, but all the little people who actually put their hands in this game, all the animators, all the modelers and coders, programmers, those people don't deserve to say that this game is bad, in my opinion, because they put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. But that said, I don't like the game. I don't like it. It doesn't interest me. I don't find it fun at all.
Well, I got something to say about that, actually. I mean, For example, what you have now with video games, because games like Call of Duty have budgets in excess of like $60 million per title, you have something happening where you have the Hollywood syndrome, where in Hollywood, for example, in order for a film to reach maximum market saturation, oftentimes they'll make it PG-13. So that means they have to make the film in such a way where it appeals to everyone. And so with games now, especially AAA titles, because the budgets are so huge, you have to make sure the game appeals to a much wider audience than what would have been required before. So essentially, games like Call of Duty have to hit this baseline of what they think that is expected of them to appeal to the widest audience. And that might mean just not taking any risks with gameplay or experimenting with anything that would change the overall experience of the game, because they want to make sure it's attractive to as many people as possible to recoup these gigantic investment costs they have. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I guess, Hollywood syndrome is what I would call it.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would say that's a big factor in not just burnout, but kind of the oversaturation of mediocre games, passable games, we'll say, they need
passable games would be the best way to
we need to hit up the Nerdwriter and say, hey, make a video on passable games, or we can make one together or something.
Yeah, that would be it. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I wish I could be there in the meeting room where they plan these games, because I want to know, like, for me, it just bugs me not knowing, like, what are they aiming for, really? Do they actually care about this game, or do they just see it as a cash cow? Some people might be passionate about it.
I don't know. I think someday someone's going to write a book about Call of Duty, and it'll explain a lot of the internal decision making at Treyarch and Activision. But a really good example of how game studios used to be in the early 90s and late 80s, early 90s, or through the 90s, would be a book called Masters of Doom. It kind of it embellishes things a little bit, but what it does is it actually follows the rise of id Software. And id Software was actually a relatively small studio for as revolutionary and market-changing as they were. And you can go and read this book and kind of see their internal decision-making about what it was about the games they were making and why they made them the way they did. For example, id Software got kind of stuck in this cycle of making Doom and Quake because it was an established franchise and they knew it would make money. So it kind of falls into that same category of where game studios, especially ones that are privately owned and they have a successful franchise, they don't want to deviate from the norm they've established because they're risking everything on these development cycles. I mean, like, and not to mention the fact that because games at this point you can't go beyond 3D at this point, at least on the technology we have. So it's ultimately just polish. So you need armies of people to polish these games. And so that impacts the overall cost, and the overall cost you have to input into it, because you have to hire all these extra artists to make things just look prettier, because you can't do things the way they were in the past. And so that's just one of those things where games have reached a point now where, in order to be fully creative, you have to take risks, but that's something that can only be done by smaller independent studios, which, I don't know, with burgeoning computer hardware becoming as good as it is, I think there's potential for more advanced and risk-taking titles, because, I mean, you had games come out that everyone seems to have played, like Firewatch, or was it There Be a Dragon, or whatever it's called, the one about the child with cancer. But games and those games didn't have polish or insane amount of graphics. They were more story-driven titles. So you have potential for those kind of things, but as far as AAAs, you probably won't see that.
Yeah, which is, in my opinion, is kind of sad. You know, it's just a thing, but at the same time, and someone mentioned this in the comments, that you know, from a business standpoint, it is smarter to be safe and go for the wide audience rather than focusing on like a very niche area. And I understand it from the business perspective, and that's not a bad thing from a business perspective. But the problem I'm having is that, almost kind of similar to politics, you know, gaming I'm very passionate about, and I'm getting of the age to where, you know, we're the influencers in the gaming area in some extent. You don't have to be a developer anymore, because there's voices, there's reviewers, there's personalities, and we're at the age where we're kind of influencing gaming in some way. And at the same time, I feel like if I don't speak up or you know, get people to think outside the box and talk about gaming and say that it's not all about business, it's not all about money, you know, for me personally, I'm not, you know, being true to myself. And while I do completely understand the business aspect of it, I think that for me, you know, someone who's actually worked on gaming, you have to put some heart in it, and you have to actually have some personality in your games. You can't just have, you know, I don't mean to insult this person, but you can't have a Britney Spears game where it's very attractive, you know, it looks great, and it seems great on the, you know, it has great content on the surface, but on underneath it doesn't have great surface. You know, I'm just using that as an analogy. You know, just any beautiful person, you know, they have, you know, all the great makeup and all the polish, but underneath there's no content. There is just very shallow. And
how dare you call Britney Spears shallow? She made the film Crossroads. How dare you? No, yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's one of those things where some games out there, they lose themselves in just being pretty. They don't bother to expand the title or take risks storytelling wise. Like, yeah. I'm trying to think of some other titles that are like that.
I feel like, for me, I like Assassin's Creed, even though it comes out every year. I haven't played all of them, but like Black Flag, I've been loving it. I loved Assassin's Creed 1, even though it had repetitive gameplay. That didn't bother me because the story was kind of enticing to me. And I mean, again, at the same time, people pick and choose what they like. You know, repetitive gameplay to me, that's okay if the storyline's good enough. I don't care about graphics as much as some people do. You know, I can play a 8-bit style game, and I think it has a lot to do with expectations. People, like, I want to call them core gamers, like not hardcore gamers, but people. I almost get annoyed by people who say that the game has to have good graphics for me to play it. And that's just me personally, because that's not a game. Just because it has good graphics doesn't mean it's a good game. You know, if you watch a Michael Bay movie, it has tons of great explosions and CGI, but the damn Transformers movies have no content to me. I don't care about Mark Wahlberg. I love him as an actor. I don't care about him in the movie. I love Shia LaBeouf. You know, whatever you think that's weird. I like him, but I don't want to see him in a Transformers movie. Like, there's not a lot of content to it. You have a beautiful woman, and there's some storyline, there's some human drama, but like that's not content. That's a cookie cutter film with great CGI using the Hasbro characters in their movie to get people to come in. That's not an actual Transformers movie. That's not anything new. That's not anything of substance. You know, and you have these games like Call of Duty that come out every year. And now you have Call of Duty in space, and it's a fun game. You know, it has action, it has guns, it has cool gameplay, it's competitive, you can play it. But you know, this is just my opinion. You know, everyone's allowed to have their opinion. But for me, that's not anything really new. And I haven't played the game, so I'm not going to say completely that that's a bad game or that it's a completely shallow game because I haven't played it, so I can't fully say that. You know, I've played the other ones and I've not really cared much for them. You know, the zombies is fun, but again, it's not, you know, after a while it becomes the same thing. And do you really have to make a new game to do the same thing over and over again? I don't know. If there's no new storyline, you're not contributing anything. You know, but that gets into a whole new territory of expansions and stuff like that. So it's a really gray area. There's no simple answer. Just like, you know, when people complain about, you know, to make an analogy, people complain about politics. If you sit there and say this is not right, this isn't working, and then someone comes up to you very condescendingly, well, what's your answer? It's like, I don't know. I'm not a politician. You know, if you have a conversation with me, maybe we can figure out some solutions. But the conversation, the solution starts with just having a conversation and opening it up. You know, you can't just stay closed-minded and accept things the way they are.
Well, yeah. Well, as far as AAA titles are concerned, though, there really, I wouldn't say there really isn't a way to fix that situation because they have fallen into the Hollywood trap. As far as they're putting so much money into it that they can't risk taking a loss on it. Which ultimately, what's interesting about the Call of Duty franchise is they're running into a situation where it's actually their number of sales is dropping because they're not changing the story up, they're changing the story up, but they're not captivating audiences enough to keep them coming back. And that might be due to market saturation, or it just might be due to the fact that people are genuinely burned out on Call of Duty, or that there are other superior shooters out there, which Titanfall has the advantage of a smaller studio taking kind of risks as far as the game they're making and ultimately experimenting with new play styles. So they have the advantage of being kind of fresh in that regard. And I don't think they use this, I think the Source engine is what they use to make Titanfall 1. I don't know, they might have updated it for Titanfall 2. But so they're using a pre-established technology. They weren't going outside of the box to get somebody else's engine. So it gave them that advantage. So they could take a little more creative risk. But ultimately, AAA titles are going to fall into that kind of nook where they're putting in so much money they have to play it safe. Like, for example, like Konami firing Kojima would be because his games are getting ridiculous and they just couldn't afford to keep him because ultimately Japan is a smaller country and they just can't afford to put that much money into their games and compete with the Western market anymore. Like, I mean, like Japan was the dominant force for a while on the planet for making video games, but that's just not so much the case anymore. So they literally can't compete with the millions of dollars that these American studios have to throw at these projects. And ultimately, I think now with AAA titles, because you have story and other things aside from just gameplay, they're culturally a little locked out because of how ridiculous some of the Japanese games get. And what I find kind of surprising is like the new Final Fantasy game, for example, has just a weird freaking gimmick to me. There's 4 dudes driving around the country in a car that usually upgrade to a jet. So it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, they're reaching a point where they're just not going to appeal to the main Western audiences. So even Japanese companies have to reevaluate the way in which they market their games.
Yeah. There's so much to say there. God.
Well, it's a story in itself for the whole Kojima thing, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And you know, there's so much to add to that. I have one small topic that I'm going to just ramble about as well, like a subtopic, which is for me, this isn't going to apply to everybody, but I just want to throw that out there because it's something that I've been actively working on, not just in gaming, but in all parts of my life, but that's distractions. I think a lot of my gamer burnout has to do with the fact that I'm not fully involved when I'm playing a game. A lot of times in the past, not so much more now, and this is interesting because I've been enjoying my games more now that I've done this, but you know, I would have my phone out, I would have my computer on, and I would have like Facebook open and chat logs and be on a chat talking to people while trying to play a game. And I find myself not really just pressing those buttons that I was talking about in the beginning of this topic. It was just really playing, like just pressing the buttons and going through the storyline and through the actions, but not really getting anything out of it. You know, I could play, you know, Destiny is one of those games where it's fun, it's great, it's flashy, but I could play it while, you know, other stuff is going on. And I've done this tons of times in the past where I'm just not really playing the game at all. I'm just there and I'm doing a bunch of other stuff, and I think that I can do this all. Or I even played 2 games at once before. Like I'll be playing League of Legends, and in between rounds or in between deaths, I'll have a single player up on, like a RPG on my PlayStation, and I'll be playing that. And like I just remember like doing all this stuff, like having 2 games up. You know, I would play like MapleStory and a multiplayer game, or I would do this stuff, and it was like, am I really getting anything out of this? Because I remember like feeling distracted. Like I'd be in a chat, and actually someone that's in the chat right now could probably attest to this. You know, I'll be playing League of Legends, and I'll kind of be you know, just kind of distant because I'm trying to look on computer, like look on the Facebook, chat with somebody, and I'm playing a single player game like while I'm dead. Like I have my death count at 50 seconds because, you know, it's near the end of the game, and I'm like, well, there's no point in like studying what's going on in the game. I might as well just distract myself until the 50 seconds is up, you know?
Are you sure you don't have ADD in that situation?
Oh, no, I mean, I'm diagnosed with ADD.
Okay, well, yeah,
this is what I'm saying is that some people probably don't have this issue. But for me, you know, I know there's other people who do this. And as I've gotten older, I've tried to tell other people not to do that because you're depriving yourself of an experience of whatever you're supposed to be doing. But 2, everything that you're doing half-assed because you're doing so many things at the same time. And yeah, go ahead.
That's you know, I mean, if you want to discuss that line of theory, there's a generational discussion about that as well versus baby boomers versus millennials, in the sense that millennials don't do well in manufacturing jobs because millennials have multitasked for most of their life. That includes like operating phones, using computers, and ultimately millennials just have been for most of their life bombarded with more information. So it's kind of a generational change in the sense that millennials it's culturally more ingrained in us because of how we were raised with more electronics and more devices. So it's just kind of the way we've adapted to that culture. But to really quick to respond to somebody in the chat, Robert Gibbs, I think everyone in Rogue One's going to die. And I mean, like everyone on the team's going to be murdered by Darth Vader at the end, but that's my theory. But yeah, back to what I was saying. It's kind of like this millennial shift between, like, for example, like my job what I do, like I file a lot of paperwork for the government. So it's a very, very singular task kind of thing. And it kills me because I want to be doing more things at once, but you can't. So, I think it's actually more of a generational thing too. But like me, I rock 3 monitors at home. So I have constant shit bombarding me all the time. But I think you can either adapt to it and kind of choose to focus on things when you want to focus, or you can just let it overwhelm you. But I think that really depends on who you are as a person.
Yeah, and maybe that's a topic we'll get in all together is distractions, because I could go on for days about distractions because it's a good topic, and it's something that I'm actively trying to take out of my life in different ways. You know, I want to do one thing at a time. And I'm working on a YouTube video. I want to make sure that I'm working on it. And again, for the sake of time, I won't go into too much detail about that specifically. But yeah, it's something that's been very relevant to me. But I also noticed it in my gaming, which is sad because gaming is supposed to be kind of my fun time. And I've noticed as I've been training in Street Fighter, this is kind of what brought it up, was I want to go to this tournament and I want to do the best that I can at this tournament. I want to actually, like, I don't have to win it, but I want to make sure that when I go there, I'm tournament ready. I did the best that I can. And the fact that I'm trying to play this game and actually train and practice and create muscle memory, I'm realizing that, you know, why do I have Facebook chat open? Like, why am I talking to somebody while I'm trying to do this? Would my sensei, if I was doing karate and my sensei was trying to train me, would I like have my girlfriend there and be like, hold on, let me have this conversation real quick. Hold on, let me tweet my girlfriend real quick. You know, hold on, let me make this Facebook post. You know, let me take a selfie. No, you can't do that. You know, why should video games of any sort be the same, any different? You're not. If you're having a really good conversation, I'll just say this one thing and then I'll let you talk. But
sure, yeah, go.
If you're having a really good conversation with somebody and there's this one dude there saying, you know, just every now and then, just, you know, like, hey, something stupid, you know, hey, every couple of seconds, that conversation is not going to be very deep because someone's interrupting you. If you're doing something, you know, specifically the video games, but anything in general, if you're doing something and you're constantly interrupting that thought process, you're not having a deep conversation with yourself or whatever it is that you're doing. At least that's my experience. Everyone kind of processes things differently, but for me, that's kind of been the analogy that I've been having as I take away a lot of the distractions.
But then again, like what you're talking about is the human. I don't know how to describe it. Like the human endeavor to be good at something or to cast off the distractions of life and focus on something singularly. I mean, that's a really common theme in like Eastern philosophy and stuff like that, where like you have hermits who live on mountains who focus exclusively on one thing to become the best at it. Like, for example, you have, I think, in Japan, one of the greatest tea houses in the world that makes like some of the best bread is on top of a mountain. And it's still there to this day, where more monks will go there and just focus on making bread and tea, and they sell that to tourists. So it's one of those things where that's not a new concept, where people will cast off the distractions of their life in order to focus on something solely, which I think it's just increasingly less common, at least in Western cultures, because of how much information is available.
And honestly, that's exactly why I made my channel. I love, there's two things that I really love. And there's subtopics within that, like personal development. I love that. Philosophy, psychology, everything within making a person better than what they are. Anything that levels up a person. And in that same instance, I love video games. And that, that's why I made my channel, to really combine those two, because there's a lot of things. This isn't anything new. Isolation and focusing on one thing is nothing new, but it's new to a lot of gamers. And that, for me, I wanted to take that and show them that there's more effective ways to do things. You can play a game and get more out of it without spending more time. It's just small things that aren't common to the common person. It's common sense, but it's not common sense, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's just one of those things that's been around forever, where, I mean, some people, I think writers would do it and things like that, like Hemingway and them. They would go and they'd have a cabin somewhere in the woods where they just take a typewriter and it's a typewriter and a bottle of vodka or something. They'd go and just type in the woods, or type a story up in the woods. But Hemingway eventually shot himself in the woods, though. But I mean, so it really depends on what your focus is and what your ultimate goal is. I think ultimately, a lot of people potentially would be more successful if they just focused on individual things, as opposed to letting themselves be overwhelmed by the stuff that's kind of everywhere.
as you get distracted.
as I get distracted by our chat, and as it was mentioned that we're running the chat as well.
Yeah.
Someone was talking about the Robert Gibbs was talking about the shocking ending of Rogue One, and I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that my theory is that the ending scene of Rogue One is going to be a door opening, exposing Darth Vader, and he's just going to cut apart everyone in the cast. And the only person that's going to escape is going to be the female actress, don't know her name. And she's going to throw like the data tape into a capsule that goes to Leia's ship or something like that. And that's going to be the end, or something horribly dark and horrific like that, which I think would be an amazing turn for Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
Probably not going to happen.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. If you didn't catch the beginning of our talk, I recommend checking out the film theorist on Star Wars Rogue One, because that's kind of where my theory is. And I'm mad because he had this idea after I had this idea, but he explained it a lot better. So check that out. I highly recommend it. Also to McFly, I think you're somewhat joking, but I do want to say a quick comment to that. Referring to, gaming can be a very social experience. I think I agree, because playing games like League of Legends, and this goes back to what I was saying, is like, because I'm distracting myself, I'm also distracting everything that my friends are saying. When my friends talking to me like, hey, when you revive, do this and this and that, or buy this item, I'm kind of like zoned out and not fully paying attention. And I am, because I'm distracted, I'm taking away from that social experience. Because I think gaming, for me, I love co-op games. That's something to know about me, is I love anything co-op, because that's a bonding experience. You create this journey, this experience, this quest that you go on together, and you win. You both get this shot of, I want to say oxytocin or serotonin, and you win together. That's like going through war together. I've never been to war, I've never been in the army, but having a battle together and surviving and winning, through all the adversity, that's awesome. But when you're distracted, and it takes away from that. When you're tweeting on your phone, it takes away from that experience, because you're not fully there. You're not supporting that person that's playing with you. You're taking away that time.
Well, I think ultimately what you're talking about is more games of a deeper competitive nature versus games of a cooperative type, or games that are openly social cooperative games. Like N64 games, you had to be very social with each other, because it was four player split screen, and I know I had a 13-inch TV that I'd play with my friends on, so that was kind of, you had to be pretty close to play that one. So that was definitely a social experience. But yeah, games like Street Fighter especially, but even like if you had really serious people, though, I'm assuming they probably just play for hours by themselves just to try and get into that right Zen moment on how to do it.
Oh yeah, and I wish I had more time because we'll have to talk about distractions, because I have a whole thing I could talk about with Street Fighter, and like I have some things I've written and I want to talk about this in the YouTube video, but it would be really cool to have an actual conversation about this too. So maybe in the future, if you guys found the idea of distractions interesting and something you want to hear more about, let us know down below so we can do that. We want to talk about things that are interesting to you guys as well. But we're definitely out of time. I appreciate all the feedback that we got in the live chat. Just so you guys know, we do try to do the podcast live every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Try to upload it on the weekends around Saturday or Sunday. And yeah, we always love you guys sharing your feedback. We want to keep on doing this and talking about new topics. This was kind of an impromptu idea, which I'm glad I did, because we got a lot of feedback and a great conversation out of it as well. But also, before I do all the closing statements, I'll let you know Ian's our guest, and he can let you know what he does and where you can find him.
Yeah, I guess if you want to find me, you can find me www.historicnerd.com, or you can find me at my YouTube channel, YouTube/historicnerd, or if you type historic nerd, you might find me. I don't know. Depending on what you look at, you may not find me at all. But yeah, usually my website's a pretty safe place. Or you can find me on VidMe now, vid.me/historicnerds. That's pretty easy. And if you also look on the consoleexplosion.com, you can find me there. Or if you want to bug me directly, you can find me at Twitter at historical nerd.
Boom. Yeah, and I'm the Philosopher. I host this show every Wednesday, as I said before. I also have my own channel, which combines essentially competitive gaming, a lot of fighting games, and personal development. You can find that over at youtube.com/thephilosopher. Have a Facebook channel that you can hit me up on, facebook.com/philosopher, or Twitter @philosopher. But you can also find me and this very cool person over at theconsoleexplosion.com. We'll have links down below to all of those so you can check us out. I want to thank you guys so much for joining the live chat, or if you're watching on YouTube, thank you guys so much for watching. Let us know what you guys thought about the idea of gamer burnout. Have you been experiencing this in your life? Let us know. And then if you like this video, like it. And if you have someone who is very distracted or is having gamer burnout, shoot them this video. Let them know. Let that person know what we think. But yeah, as always, thank you guys so much for watching.
Or also come back and tell me if I'm completely wrong about Rogue One. I would love to hear about it.
Yes, that too. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.